All right, well, good morning again. Thank you so much for joining us today for our training on resiliency and fundraising. It seems to be a pretty timely topic for us based on the participation in the room today, and also just the reality that we're nearing giving season, and depending on who you talk to, we might already be in it. As myself, Jordan Richardson, and my colleague Ellie Burns were preparing for this training with our speaker, Cherry Koshi, we talked a lot about what does it look like to have conversations with donors throughout the year, so that giving season is not just the one time where we're all scratching our heads, but we're really working with those donors year round, which is where that resiliency piece comes in for today's training. So looking forward to joining you and learning from Cherry today. A little bit of housekeeping for us. This is a Zoom meeting. We're all very familiar, I think, at this point in life with how Zoom works, but the chat function is open. If you have thoughts, questions for us throughout the next hour or so, feel free to drop those in the chat. Ellie and I will be monitoring that and facilitating some Q&A with Cherry towards the end. If anything is a burning question that needs to be asked right away, we'll be sure to interrupt him with that as well. But with that, I'd love to introduce you to Cherry Koshi this morning. Cherry is a certified fundraising executive and a chartered advisor in philanthropy. He is currently the Chief Development Officer at Endowment Partners, an investment firm that works solely with nonprofits to create sustainable success. I met Sharian at an AFP meeting several years ago while he was serving as Director of Development with Des Moines Performing Arts, and I really enjoyed watching his journey over the last few years and hearing him speak on a variety of occasions around the topics of fundraising and donor behavior. So Sharian, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks everybody for being here. I want to make sure that you can hear me and find the chat function of the Zoom control. So if you wouldn't mind just throwing your name and where you're joining us from in the chat, that'd be great. For those of you that know me, please stop texting me because that's getting a little overwhelming. I appreciate it though, I'm just joking. So I am grateful that all of you are here, and I'm grateful that you can hear me. We're gonna have a great time today. We're gonna talk about some of the strategies and some of the tactics that you can use to improve your fundraising success. That's why we're here. So I wanna combine as much theoretical and philosophical knowledge as well as practical knowledge as well. And the Community Foundation will send you a copy of these slides so you can get access to some of the templates and tools that are in there. I've just written scripts into the slide deck, which I'm not necessarily going to go over, but you can take those and modify them to your purposes. You'll also have access to all the slides for your own purposes as well. If you want to send this to a board member, another staff member, your high school crush, you do whatever you'd like to do with the slides, and I'd love for you to use them however you'd like. So with that, one of the first things that I want to do for you is sort of level set around donor behavior. So what I'm going to do, if you have a pen, paper, if you're old school like I am, I've got my little like notepad here. If you've got a pen and paper, pull that out right now. If not, just sort of, I'm going to read a list of words to you that are also going to be on the screen, and then I'm going to ask you to write down as many of these as you can. So let's go ahead and get started. Here are the words on the screen: bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, catnap, nod off, shut eye, sedate, hit the sack, corn dog, conk out, lie down, doze, slumber, snore, nap, siesta, yawn, drowsy, and peace. So take a moment to remember all the words that you can. If you're using pen and paper, feel free to do that now. And I apologize for doing this right after lunch, or right during lunch. Maybe you're eating right now, because maybe you're ready for a nap or something like that. So let's take a moment to write down all the words that you can. And what I'm going to do now is ask you a couple of questions. In the chat, indicate yes if bed is on your list. Just put a Y or N on in the chat. Lots of Y's. Oh, Jordan said no. That's interesting. Dream. Is dream on your list? Dream. Lots of Y's there. Some no's. Okay. Is corn dog on your list? Corn dog. Kathy had corn dog. Jordan had corn dog. Mariette said no, but I heard you say it. Is sleep on your list? Yes, some no's, yes. Is snore on your list? Okay, good. Ellie had yes. Some people had no. Okay, excellent. So let's take a look at why we decided to remember certain words. So the first word that I said was bed. And the reason why many of you put yes is because of what's called the primacy effect. We remember the first thing that happens. Now, if you fall asleep for the rest of this webinar, let me just reinforce to you that when a bunch of mail ends up in a donor's mailbox, email, direct mail, whatever it is, the mail that ends up that we react to first is often the most memorable. So if there's one thing that you take away from this, it's that the consistent communication that you have in front of your donors leverages that primacy effect, the thing that we see first, and it allows us to respond or respond more proactively to that. Now, if you had dream on your list, that's what's called the Zeigarnik effect. The reason why you had dream on your list is because you noticed that I spelled dream incorrectly. And our brains are designed to not have these things out of place. You were upset with me that I spelled dream incorrectly, and you wanted to correct that in your head. And as a result, you remembered that. If corn dog was on your list, maybe you're like me and some other lovely friends in the room who love the state fair and sad that it's over and you're waiting for a corn dog. But this is the contrast effect. All of the other words on the list had something to do with each other, but corn dog was the one that stood out. So as we think about, again, how do we stand out to our donors? How do we get through the noise of communication? Contrast effect is one aspect of that. Snore is on your list, if you had it on your list, because of what's called the spacing effect. There were a number of words that sounded and were spelled very much like snore, and because of that repetition, you had that on your list. Now, many of you, but not all of you, had sleep on your list. And here's the thing that I want to reveal to you. Sleep was nowhere on the list at all. Sleep was not on the list. And what we found when we do these studies, not just with these types of things, but with a whole variety of other things, is that we fill in the gap. And there are really cool videos where you can see people who are diehard. Sleep was on the list. It absolutely was on the list. I will bet you money that it's on the list, and every sort of variation around that. And almost half of all people who do these types of studies will engage in false recall, will engage in a behavior of reinforcing the fact that they saw something that didn't actually happen. There are really interesting ones around like seeing an accident happening and switching words around and whether or not that occurred. And so what I really want you to take away from this first activity is the fact that there are behavioral constraints or behavioral aspects that are happening to your donors and to you every single day. We're going to do another activity in a little bit that reinforces this, but those behaviors either nudge your donor towards giving and giving more, or they nudge your donor away from giving and away from giving more. So one of my professors, Dan Ariely, says that we usually think of ourselves in the driver's seat, that we are rational beings and we're in control over the decisions that we make. But in fact, that's really more of a perception, that it has more to do with our desires and our biases with how we view ourselves than with reality. And so with regard to our donors, what I want to make sure you're clear upon is that this is not an ethical issue per se. Like, we're not trying to replicate the movie Inception, where we're putting a memory or some idea into your donor's head that they don't have already. You're never going to convince a vegan to support a meat-eating charity. I don't know that those exist, but you get the idea, right? Those are very incompatible worldviews and ideas. So the thing that I want you to remember is that not just other nonprofits, but all of the marketing that's happening in the world is nudging your donor towards making certain types of decisions. Buy this, purchase that, spend your money here. And so what we want to do is help people govern those biases that they have and nudge them towards making a decision that they want to make, that makes them feel good about themselves. And so that's what we're really going to talk about. How do we nudge donors in the right direction? Over the course of an entire year, we'll be focused on this last quarter because that's the most practical for all of you. But we're going to cover really 3 things, and then we'll get to your questions. First, I want you to understand what I call random acts of fundraising. Then I want to get really tactical around preparing for end of year giving today. And then next, or finally, talk about optimizing your year-end giving opportunities throughout the last couple of months of the year. And then, as I said, we'll deal with specific scenarios or questions that you might have. So what do I mean when I talk about random acts of fundraising? You've certainly heard of random acts of kindness, which are great. Unfortunately, when it comes to fundraising, a lot of organizations, surely not anyone in this room, but a lot of organizations will simply send out an end of year mailing and hope and pray that this end of year mailing is successful. And probably several years ago, it was very successful. And maybe there were times over the last several years that it was successful. And so we've sort of lather, rinse, repeat our end of year strategy. We're like, oh, that worked. And so we have to keep doing it. And all the studies out there say that 30 to 40% of all giving happens in the month of December. We'd be fools not to do that. So of course we should have an end of year appeal. But I have this like 4-hour lecture, if you're bored sometime, on the art of war that my friend Nicole, I think, may have heard at some point. But the Sun Tzu quote that I think is the most useful is that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So a lot of times as organizations, we employ tactics without an overarching strategy, and this happens surprisingly quite a bit when it comes to year-end fundraising or just fundraising in general. So there are these random amalgam of tactics. We'll send out an end-of-year appeal, we'll send out an email, we'll do something with Giving Tuesday, and they don't have an overarching strategy that ties these activities together. And because of that, we're talking to the wrong people at the wrong time, or not enough in order to engage them in the behavior that we want them to do, which is give to the organization or give more to the organization. So what are the causes of this? Obviously, we're sometimes when we're in it, and I've done this before, you're in it and you look back, you're like, wait, why did we do this? That was not a good decision. And I'm sure some of my colleagues were like, yeah, we had those experiences in our postmortem, right? So there's a few causes that I want you to be aware of, because if it's happening to you, being aware of it will help you set up a bulwark against that. But if it's happening because of someone else, you can sort of say, I see that happening and I want to be proactive about addressing it. The first one is my favorite. It's called the highest paid person's opinion, or the hippo effect. So we have 2 options about what to do, and all of the data and the best practices tell us to do option A, but someone who shall remain unnamed, I don't know who that is in your organization, says, I would never give to that appeal. I would never do it that way. That language wouldn't work on me. And so we follow the highest paid person's opinion. Now, this is not a session about change management. We'd have a whole nother session around how to have the conversation with the highest paid person about what to do here in this circumstance. But be aware that a lot of times what we do is limited by that person's perception, or in fact misperception, about what ought to be done. The second component, or second reason why this happens, is a lot of copycat syndrome. I can't tell you the number of organizations. I think right now we're working with about 50 organizations, and every organization, quite literally, every organization has this same DNA to them. We saw this other organization be very successful in fill in the blank: a golf tournament, a gala, an email appeal, a written appeal. That organization did great. We should do what they are doing. And this copycat syndrome ignores the fact that every organization has its own DNA. And I get really concerned when consultants talk about, here's the formula for end of year fundraising success. You're not going to hear that from me, because every organization needs to understand how it's wired, but also how its donors are wired. There isn't, unfortunately, sorry to spoil this for you, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to all fundraising for all organizations. What I'll suggest to you is that there are some ideas that you ought to think through and some ways of deploying that follow best practices, but you have to craft that to fit your organization's needs. And I hope that that motivates and encourages you rather than says, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming, I could never do that. But be aware, particularly when a board member sits on another board or an executive director sees something that's happened in another organization, like, oh, they reported that they made $400,000. Of course, we should be doing that, when it does not fit what your organization is doing. And part of this is that we believe in our heart of hearts, we believe that knowledge is power. We've been taught this ever since Sunday morning cartoons, that if we tell people something, that they will change their behavior. But what in reality, and you can follow the research here, simply presenting people with more information about what you do, more information about how bad the problem is, or how many people you serve, or the depths of your theory of change, is not going to get them to contribute. Now, this goes back to kind of core marketing strategy. If anybody has read the really expensive book by Gene Schwartz, you know that there's really a focus on and this is from the 60s, focus on understanding what already motivates, in that case, customers, but in our case, donors. There are core beliefs that your donors have, and no amount of knowledge is going to really significantly shift them from one behavior or the other. I shared this in a presentation that Jordan was in a different context, and I said, one of the critical pieces of evidence for me is that every doctor will tell you that if you've suffered a heart attack, there are 3 things that you should do. And this is prescriptive. If you've suffered a heart attack, you should lose weight, eat healthy, and exercise more. Lose weight, absolutely. Exercise more and eat healthy. Those are the 3 things that everyone should do. The number of people that have a heart attack that do all 3 things is 17%. They know what the right thing to do is, they don't do it, even though they have been in an emergency room, been in a hospital, and gotten this information from a doctor. How much less so is that true for our materials? So is this to say we don't make donors aware, we don't inform them and educate them? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I am trying to say is, you do a lot of great things. You don't have to kitchen sink everything in every email, in every appeal. Donors don't necessarily need to know at every stage all of the pieces that go into all of the great work that you're doing. They need to understand at a high level, and as they indicate greater awareness and greater interest in what you're doing, then they might get into more information about what it is that you do. I love this quote by Herbert Simon that says, "A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention." A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So if you are providing lots of information to your donors, how do we know that they're actually engaging or being attentive to the information that you're providing? How many people are reading a multi-scroll email on their phone, because most emails are read on the phone? How many people are reading every line of a written appeal that you provide? Very, very few. That's what all of the statistics indicate. So be mindful of the fact that in general, we're skimmers. We're looking for salient information. The other thing is that people assume that they know what motivates them, but quite literally all of the research indicates that we are not good judges of what motivates us. And while I'm skeptical in general of donor surveys, and we'll get into how they could be used properly, if you were to ask a donor if they wanted a print appeal or an email appeal, the research indicates that most, if not all, would say that they want an email appeal. Oh, it saves money, and of course I'll read it. And the reality is that most donors do read print appeals, but they don't read email newsletters, sorry. So that's just one example, but in a lot of cases, when we ask donors or customers what motivates them, we get false answers. We can't get into all of the science around that, but it's important for you to understand that as we go into the tactical components. So here's a really clear example of where that information heavy system 2 thinking. If system 2 is new to you, let's reach out and talk about that separately. But where you're talking about the features, the benefits, the information heavy components, those types of advertisements are and marketing and awareness building campaigns are effective at certain points, but are not necessarily great at making good quick decisions. They take a long time for people to process because there's a lot of information there. So this is a Listerine commercial that is really talking about how this works and all of the chemicals that go into Listerine, which is also a little scary. This is the opposite, a System 1 ad that says, what will go through your mouth today? Now, hopefully it's not all of those things, because that's a little gross, especially the pen, but if you are looking at this, there's a visceral reaction. Oh my gosh, what has already gone through my mouth today? And how does that compel me to think about using mouthwash and using Listerine in particular? That emotional connection that's a very visual, that has very little text and very little data around it. The nostalgia effect is also a key component of what's successful in appeal. So for me, and I don't know about you, two things that I'm like all about right now. I just finished binging Cobra Kai on the plane ride yesterday. And then I went and saw Top Gun Maverick twice, once in IMAX and once in a regular theater. And they've done a brilliant job of bringing these ideas back. Why would this be successful? I mean, these were 30-year ago franchises that, I mean, Maverick is now $1 billion film and Cobra Kai is on season 5, right? Like, it doesn't make sense that this would still resonate with people, but it does because it draws us back into this remembered past. And we want to be part of those stories again. Now, it may be appropriate for you to tap into nostalgia for your organization. It might not be, but think about where your donors were in their story 20, 30 years ago, or how they thought about this issue 20, 30 years ago. And how can you tap into some of that nostalgia to bring them back into an engagement with those memories, those ideas? There's great research around that as well. The last thing I want to mention to you around why we get into these random acts of fundraising is because of shiny object syndrome. So we see something that's cool and fancy and people are being successful at it. And this isn't necessarily copycat. We don't necessarily know someone who is doing cryptocurrency giving or who's, you know, we don't know anyone locally that's being really successful in something else. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do those things, whether it's cryptocurrency or Giving Tuesday or, you know, AI in your fundraising system, whatever it is, they might be good and useful tools. We're not here to diagnose that. There's certainly benefits and drawbacks, but we jump from one thing to another because we believe that new idea is what we're missing, as opposed to doing the core things right. So again, if you're going to take a nap for the rest of the session, the thing that I'm going to focus on tactically from now out is to help you reinforce what you are already doing in a way that you would do that consistently and intentionally towards building good relationships with donors that last all the way through the year. So the thing that I want you to be mindful of is when you see a one-size-fits-all or you know, this is exactly the template to use for what to do, be skeptical of that. If you see any of the signs of hippo or copycat syndrome or shiny object, you've got to be on your guard to make sure that those things do not happen and that you stay true to good donor relationships, to building trust-based philanthropy with your donor base so that there is that longevity and sustainability. So whoever you think said this, some people say Aristotle, some say Will Durant, doesn't matter. But the takeaway is the idea that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. This was plastered on the wall of my high school down by the speech and debate room. And it's something that we looked at every single day to remind us that what we do is not a single act. Our single activity is not what demonstrates excellence. It's what we do repeatedly to be able, in whatever we do, but to engage, in this case, our donors. So there are 3 questions that you need to answer when it comes to raising money from your donors. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations approach this from the perspective of 4 inappropriate questions, which is, you have money, you should give to our organization. I'm sure you've seen or heard of this happen where someone says, well, they have lots of money, they should be giving to our organization. Or it's a really good cause. I've sat on a lot of boards where they are like, well, our cause is such a good cause, people should donate to our cause. Or you say that you've seen this said where organizations say, we're really good at what we do. We have these great programs, they're exciting, they're innovative, they're really important, we're really good at it, so you should give us money. Or, unfortunately, this is terrible, but we really need the money. Those are not good reasons for people to give. What are the questions that your donors are asking? They're asking, why should I give? Why should I give to your organization? And why should I give now? And we tend to ignore those questions because they're hard questions to answer, because it requires us to be really introspective and really think about what are the core cause-oriented reasons. Not because of some tactical, like I want to have this program, we want to do this, that, and the other thing, but what are the real kind of gut reasons why people would give to your organization? Why would they give to you? And why would they give now? So if you have not gone through this exercise and really taken a deep look at these 3 answers for your organization, and then I would say even go further to break this down into introductory donor offers, mid-level donor offers, and major giving offers. Why should they give $10 or $10 a month? Why should they give $1,000? Why should they give $10,000? These are all important questions that your donors would potentially have. And we want to make sure that these are answered well. You may have heard of this talked about as a case for support or something like that. If that language is helpful to you, great. It doesn't really matter as long as you're answering these questions in a coherent way that you're able to replicate. So with that, let's talk about the tactical elements of preparing for end of year giving. What are some strategies? Now, don't forget, you're going to get the slides that you'll be able to copy, paste, and use and modify. But as I mentioned before, I want to really demonstrate to you that I can alter your mind. I can mind meld with you. I can change what you say. So there's a possibility that you cheat in this activity, and I'm going to ask you to be honest and not cheat. And it's just going to take 1 minute, literally 60 seconds. So if your last name begins with A through L, so Dr. Burns is in the first one, Nicole Serrano, you're in the last one, right? If your name begins with A through L, I want you to close your eyes. Close your eyes right now. I'm going to give you a second. You're going to close your eyes. So if your last name begins with A through L, your eyes are closed. Everyone else, M through Z, read this on the screen. I'm not going to say it out loud because obviously they can still hear me. Okay. And nobody opened their eyes yet if your eyes are closed. You've read that. Now, private message me, if you can, in the chat, your guess. And remember what the guess is the number, okay? The guess is the number. Got it? Okay, now, M through Z, folks, you can close your eyes if you want. You don't have to, but okay, let's be more reasonable on some of those guesses. You've got better guesses. All right, so A through L, you can open your eyes. There we go. All right, so everyone can see this now if you want, but A through L, I want you to look at this question. Is the number of nonprofit pieces of direct mail sent to the average US home more or less than 1,000? Now, what I want you to do is put in the chat, in the public chat, what is your guess? What is your guess on the number of nonprofit mail pieces that are sent to a house per year? Now, I'm going to read out the private messages besides Nicole's, which is 1 million. Colleen says 256. Claire says 350. Megan says 120. Ian says 12. Melissa says 425. Now, look at the public chat. 2750. Chris Anderson, 750. Ian, 200. Han, 750. Ellie says 850. Nancy says 2,380. This is very precise, Nancy. I love it. Tyler says 650. So these numbers are not even the same ballpark, right? Now, of course, they're not all going to be in the same. Sue says 1251. In case you're wondering, so just so you know, for those people that went last, I primed you with the number 1,000 or less. For the first group, I'm just going back in the slides, I said 100 or less. The simple alteration of a number on this slide dramatically shifted what you responded to. My friend Bernard did this in New York City doing street fundraising, where they would point out what street they're on. Hey, we're on 2nd Avenue. Would you consider making a gift to this nonprofit? Versus doing it in Harlem. Hey, we're on 156th Street. Had nothing to do with the charity or nothing to do with the fundraising appeal. And the average gift increased by a significant amount just because of the reference to the street they were on. Now, for some of you that are wondering, the answer is 92 pieces of mail, nonprofit mail, per year per US household. So imagine what that looks like for your appeal versus 454 marketing pieces. There's the research if you want to check it out. So I brainwashed you, right? I brainwashed you, or many of you, some, not everyone. Here's the thing that you need to understand. It's from Tamsin Webster. If you're not following Tamsin on Twitter, I would highly recommend it. If someone hears your message and it reinforces that they're smart, capable, and good, they'll continue to follow your recommendations because they want to feel that way. So we can very simply shift how people think about their own behavior, their own good, how they think of things by simple language and simple numbers. So we want to reinforce social norms and donor identity. We tend to take for granted that our donors are our donors. We tend to forget that they don't primarily identify themselves as your donors. So we need to make sure that we use identity-focused messaging as early as possible as a donor, as a generous giver to our organization, as a member, if you do that, right? To remind them of who they are to your organization. People like you, it reinforces this idea that they're aligned with your organization. One of the primary reasons why people don't give is because they've forgotten that they've given to your organization, which is unfortunate. Now, when I was at DMPA, we did a similar idea to this where we would send out just a postcard, a very cheap and cheerful postcard that said, your generous support contributes to that total amount that this number of people, this on this day of season ticket holders. We did this for existing donors and then non-donors to the organization, people that were in the space. Maybe some of you got this, which would be really funny. But the idea here is we're just reinforcing that identity. We're not asking them for anything. It's a postcard with no ask and no appeal whatsoever. We also want to bring attention to the donor's choice. We want to create space for donors to actively choose to follow through on their own intentions. So this is a unique way of using donor surveys rather than using donor surveys to come up with marketing preferences, which is probably not a great way of doing it. Can we use donor surveys to reinforce why they care about the cause? They may not articulate their exact motivation, but they've said to themselves, this is a cause that I care about. I care about homelessness. I care about hunger. I care about underserved kids. Whatever it is, they're reinforcing that in their decision-making. So then allow them to create their own commitment. Maybe it's a pledge. Maybe it's a plan for giving. What we want to encourage most of all is they talk to someone about their plan, because once I articulate my plan to go on a diet or lose weight or whatever it is, now I'm accountable for that. And I have to believe that in order to be able to follow through. So the more that we can get donors talking about their philanthropy and engaging with others about their philanthropy, the better. And that all goes into creating a plan, a goal or a plan. So creating habits around generosity. For those of you who have been in courses that I've done before, I talk about sharing like quite literally everything I have, because when everyone does fundraising well, especially in our community, our donors are cross-pollinate all the time. People that give to one organization give to another organization. On average, people give to 6 or 7 organizations in a year. So you doing well by donors and encouraging a culture of philanthropy does a tremendous effort in lifting all philanthropic boats, making sure that everyone in our community understands that giving is important. So start in September, send an impact story this month. Immediately after this, start crafting this. If you don't know exactly how to craft an impact story, you could watch Rachel Beerbauer, another fellow Iowan, a little further north, has a great video on creating impact statements. But in general, you want to do it omni-channel, make it visual, and tell a story. Some person, not a bunch of data, not a bunch of like infographic stuff. This person, Susie was in this space and her life was transformed because of your generous gift. We show a picture if we can. If we're not, we can use a stock photo, but we send an impact story that reminds the donor, A, of who they are, and B, of what they've accomplished. Cheap, cheerful, no ask. You can send a postcard for 61 cents. So if you have 1,000 donors, it's $600 to send a postcard to your donors in September that reinforces their identity, that gets them to understand what they've done. Don't overthink this. Send it out by mail, send it out by email, send it out on social media, ideally all 3, but if not, pick one. The more you do, the better, right? Because we're reinforcing that relationship with the donor. You might want to send out a donor survey. Use Google Forms, cheap and cheerful. Why is this cause? Why is hunger? Why is homelessness? Why are the arts important to you? Depending on your circumstances, what of the things that we do are most important? Are you considering continuing your loyal support? We use phrases like loyal support to reinforce what they do. And then we reformat their answers. 91% of you said that this cause was important. We send that back to them. This was one of the most important programs that we do. Many of you were considering continuing your loyal support. It's easy content, but it creates a neural pathway for your donor. Lots of people filled out the survey. Lots of people said that they were going to continue to support the organization. So these are all ways of continuing to engage them. Now, Outreach October, right? So set up in September, Outreach October. Send them a voicemail thanking them for support. There's a little script here. Hey, I'm an AFP board member. I'm calling you to thank you for your support of the AFP Foundation. Whatever that looks like for your organization. Just leave them a voicemail. Maybe just start with your most significant relationships and work your way down. If you don't get to all of them, no harm, no foul. Employ volunteers. Give them the script. Give them the phone numbers. Tell them to make as many voicemail calls as they can. If it's possible, host an in-person or virtual event for donors. Now, don't think of this as a ask event. This is a get-together. So there's no program, there's no ask, there's food and drink. We're networking. Why? Because it builds a community understanding of who we all are. Oh, there are other people that donate to this organization. I'm going to get to know them. I want to know who they are. And now I'm part of a group. And our group dynamics now reinforce our activities. So if you can't, especially in a virtual environment, try to make it as interesting as possible. Don't go overboard, but even a virtual tour could be useful if that is viable. So do what you can, where you can with these pieces. Now, the last piece that I want to get into is maximizing your year-end giving opportunities. We've built our infrastructure in September and October. Now we need to actually ask our donors for money in November and December. How you play this out, as I said before, is not templatized, except to say that you don't ask early, you engage your donors, and then you ask. So just dropping an ask on someone's desk is not a good strategy. It is more likely to fail than not. But if we engage and then ask, we'll have more success. So there are 3 B's to donor behavior. There's a behavior that we want them to do, whether it's to donate or donate more, for example. There are barriers to those decisions, and there are benefits to those decisions for the donor. So we're not going to go deep into crafting a donor behavior, but I want to remind you that there may be friction on your website, in your mailed appeal that you want to have someone outside your organization help you to identify. You may have been part of the Fundraising Institute, where we did like secret shopping of organizations. We'd call them up and try to donate. And if you were in that session, you remember it was really hard to actually donate to an organization on the phone. When we did this on screen, and I won't do this in this situation, but have someone outside your organization go and try and make a donation on your website. How many clicks, time it, see how long it takes for them to get through that donation. And figure out where are the friction points and how can we eliminate friction. Have someone outside your organization decide whether or not to open up your direct mail. What are all the pieces? And here's why that, I'll get to how that could be a problem in a moment. But don't forget, we'll talk about January in a second, but you need to make giving feel really good. People depend on feedback, whether it's in a workplace environment or in a philanthropic environment. Feedback helps us to understand what we did was a good thing or it was not a good thing. It was recognized, it was useful, it was helpful, or it wasn't. And so those types of feedback loops need to be immediate, they need to be emotional, they need to be positive. So if I make a gift to an organization and it takes a long time for someone to acknowledge that my gift happened, or they don't acknowledge it at all, and I never get told that my gift was received, those are reasons why I stopped giving to organizations. I may still be on your list, but I'm not continuing to give to your organization. The next thing is to spotlight social norms. What are the things that people like them are doing? Some organizations use donor lists, some organizations use, it was DMPA, we had a playbill. There are other organizations that do this differently, but what do other people do? And how do I know what is the right thing to do? A very good example of this is on websites. How do I know what I should give? What is the most helpful gift? If you just have a PayPal link that says, which I highly recommend against, especially a blank one, I don't know how much will help you. I don't know if $10 or $100 or $1,000 will help you. Remember that activity where our numbers were way off. If you tell me that it costs $1,000 to provide a hungry person with help, I may not be able to do $1,000, but I may be able to do more. But if you don't give me any basis, I may just do $10, right? Like I just don't know. And then we need to prime the right identity. So if we have lots of different identities, we're friends, we're employees, we're neighbors, whatever that is. So our identities are shaped in a lot of different directions. So we want to make sure that we're clear about which identities are primed. Alex, I see your question. I'll get to that in just a second because it'll be really appropriate. So what I want to talk about for a second is thinking about the behavior mapping around the donor decision. So this morning I wanted coffee, and you might think that the idea is I just go and get coffee. That's the behavior. In the reality, I had to brush my teeth, I had to get in the car, I had to go to the coffee shop. So there are all these pieces that I needed to do in order to get my coffee. And actually, this cup of coffee took 5 minutes to brew. So it was more than I bargained for. But the reality is that there are a lot of pieces that your organization may be introducing as friction. So one example of that is there's an organization in town, I won't name it, but I'm a donor and I love them. But they sent me something in the mail and they asked me to mail it back, and there wasn't an easy way to mail it back because I don't have stamps. I'm weird. I just don't know. I don't have stamps. It took me a while to find my checkbook, and someone not lovely emailed me and said, hey, you're going to give? And I was like, yes, absolutely. I absolutely am going to give, but I don't have stamps. I got to find stamps. So if there isn't a way to do that, you've got to make sure that you are giving people, whether you give them a stamp or you're giving them the rationale for how to, like the time to process that information. So my Netflix queue, as we've talked about already, sometimes will have this like really heady drama, documentary stuff on my Netflix queue. But in reality, when I get on Netflix, I'm watching things like Cobra Kai or Wedding Crashers, because that's like in the moment what I'm doing. So if you need me to plan for a decision, particularly higher level gifts, you best be in front of me very early with as little friction as possible to get that engagement. So we need to move from this is a good idea, but maybe I'll do this later, to I've got to do this right now. I've got to make this gift at the end of the year. So what does that look like? In November, we need to do a need story. This is a story that is unfinished, just like dream was misspelt, that says, this is a person affected by our organization. You might think it costs $5,000 to keep someone off the streets and get them into a home. But in reality, our model allows people to get back into housing for just $50 a month. Would you consider helping this person get permanent housing? Please take some time to consider. And in November, we have time to do some of those things because they don't have to make a decision immediately necessarily. Maybe you want them to, but we send in the midst of this a thanks for giving communication. We might say something like, during Thanksgiving, we're so grateful for our donors. Now, all that to say, it is very important to intentionally design whatever that engagement strategy is for your audience. Don't just be a seagull organization that flies onto shore, squawks a lot, drops some stuff, and then flies away, because donors don't have the attention span or the ability to navigate all of that when they get at least 92 nonprofit mail pieces in their mailbox. There's too much out there. So we need to make sure that we're very clear about building that engagement strategy from beginning to end. There are a couple of slides that I missed in there that's not super important, but I want to make sure that we get to some other key components. So when we get to December, that's a deadline for most of us. For donors, that might be a tax deadline that is appropriate. So we want to, if we're going to send out a print appeal, which I would recommend, generally that's a good idea, but we also want to include like an email chaser or a social media chaser or both to help flesh out like all the things that someone might see. So there's a template there as well that also says, hey, if you got our mail, but if it's easier to donate, go to the website to donate here. Make it short and sweet when you do a reminder. It's not a new appeal. It's just a reminder at the end of the year, like in the last week of December. Hey, here's a reason to, here's a reminder that you can give. The deadline is hope-filled and aspirational. It's never desperate. It's never like a, we can't keep the lights on. People don't want to give money to an organization that they don't feel will be successful in the future. So then, joyous January. Don't forget that starting in January, your engagement strategy continues from where you were, but builds from there. So as I said before, not just receiving from your organization, but a thought-filled, personalized, and prompt acknowledgement of their gift, and now a new intentional journey all the way through the year that builds their engagement through the third quarter or fourth quarter of next year, which is where your success will be. So the last thing that I want to touch upon is recession, inflation. Oh my, we're all scared of what that looks like. I'm not going to go into tons of economic garbage for you, but what I do want you to understand is that the studies indicate from the Indiana School of Philanthropy that when there are economic downturns, absolutely charitable giving goes down, but it does not ever, 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 ever go to zero. It never goes to zero. There are donors for whom your organization is the most important thing, and they will continue to be generous. Even if you're in their top 3 or their top 5, they will continue to find ways of supporting your organization, even if it's not in this calendar year. So stop thinking of the annual fund as a calendar year thing. Start building organizational relationships. If you can't give this year, that's no problem. When times are right, we want to build those relationships during economic downturns, because for those donors, when there is an expansion and a peak, which always happens in an economic environment, that we're clear about that engagement and that relationship so that when they can, they will give. Now, the thing that I want to share with you around asset-based giving, which I'm sure you've heard of before, is that for some of your donors, there may be a market worry, absolutely. But in general, most of your donors have invested in the market for some period of time. And the market at this point is well higher than it was in 2020, certainly well higher than it was in 2000 or 1990 when some of your donors started investing. So there may be opportunities for them to give gifts of assets rather than gifts of cash. So the thing that we want to listen for is, I wish I could do more. I wish I could do more. That opens the door to having conversations with our donors for asking for these non-cash gifts. So some people will continue to give gifts of cash. That's great. We'll continue to rely on that. But we want to think about mutual funds and stocks that have increased in value, particularly over a long period of time. Have you ever thought about doing a charitable gift annuity or creating a charitable trust? These are vehicles that can provide you with an immediate tax benefit and potentially create income for you or your heirs. An IRA charitable rollover, if you're over the age of 70 or 72, depending on how early you want it, you should start marketing it early. It can reduce taxes for those individuals. And then certainly build your bequest schema early. As organizations are talking to donors today, and they're saying, oh, I wish I could do more, we want to tell them stories of people who have engaged with philanthropic intention that doesn't involve cash. So be mindful of the fact that these relationships, you may not get the cash today, absolutely, especially with bequests. Bequests on average, I want to say, is like 7 years, someone can correct me in the chat, to maturity on average. But that relationship and that gift can be even larger than an annual gift for those people. So what does it look like to do this in the small shop in particular? Oh, we don't have all of those tools. Well, you want to create simple forms and illustrations, particularly for gifts of security. I just Googled, like, Feeding America has a great description. There's lots of organizations, even ones in town, that have great examples of how to do this. And any organization should be able to accept gifts of appreciated assets. Very low risk for your organization. And many organizations in town or in the region that do this as a benefit for their employees. So if you've had an employee who's been there for 20 years and they've gotten stock benefits, they may have a reason to use that as a gift. What about for charitable gifts and annuities? The Community Foundation is an excellent resource on that, but the Humane Society also has some examples that you can look at. Just Google what organizations are doing, and you'll need to work with someone, particularly on gift annuities and trusts. So this is not a DIY type of thing, but reach out to the Community Foundation, get connected about how can we start thinking about charitable gift annuities and trusts, particularly in advance of having a donor conversation, so that all of those pieces are like, do this today. Honestly, I'm not even joking. Reach out because you want these pieces in place so that you don't have a donor who says, oh, I want to do a charitable gift annuity in December. That's a disaster for you, right? You don't want to have to scramble to figure this out. IRA rollovers are really straightforward. So the Mayo Clinic has a really good thing, but there are certainly other examples. I shared this with a board member. They had no idea that this was an opportunity. They were able to give to multiple organizations through their IRA rollover, and there was no money out of their pocket because of this. They actually saved money on their taxes as a result of this. So these are great stories to share with board members or donors about how donors are taking advantage of that. So as I said before, think about the donor problem. What is the donor problem? I don't have cash. Cash is not the only way for them to give. I listen for, I wish I could do more language, and talk to them about, let me tell you a story of a donor just like you who did this. They had assets, they had stocks or something like that, that were depreciating about, they were not depreciating, they were losing value. They decided to contribute that to a charitable gift annuity because that's where those assets were going anyway. They got the immediate tax deduction and they were able to get income from that charitable gift annuity. Win-win-win in a down market for them. That's a great story. These stories don't need to be your own. They can be the story of another organization or another set of donors that did this strategy. Have you ever thought about that? Then ideate. Would it be helpful if we could help solve some of these problems by doing something meaningful with your resources? Can I go back and get some resources? Can I talk to the Community Foundation about some ways in which we can put together some strategies for you and get the right people in the room to say, if you are able to do this, then we're able to achieve the impact that you want to achieve for the cause that you care about. And so then the last thing that I want to say about this is you do not, I talked about like IRAs and CGAs and lots of alphabet soup. You do not need to have those answers. What Dr. Russell James always tells me, and this is his research about why annual fund giving goes up when you do good planned giving. What he always tells me is, Sharon, your goal is to get the next meeting. Your goal is to get the next meeting. And you don't need to necessarily be the only person in that room. In fact, you shouldn't be, right? We're not the smartest people on the planet. So get a bunch of people at the table who can help you facilitate that so you can move that donor conversation forward. So get the next meeting. And now what I want to do is address some of the questions that you have in the chat, but I want to give you a moment to ask any additional questions in the chat as we go through this. As you're thinking through those, I want to remind you of the key takeaways. So if you're waking up now from when you fell asleep, consistency and intentionality are the most important aspects. You need to be consistently communicating with your donors all throughout the year, not giving you examples of September, October through December and January, but make sure that that continues. Don't just take this and just stop. Continue to communicate with your donors. They should not, this is the only prescriptive thing I will say to you. They should not all be asks. They should not all be appeals. You should be informing your donors of what their gift has done. In some cases, informing them of new, exciting things that are happening in your organization, but you should be intentional as well about the journey you want to take that donor relationship on. So you and your donor are in a relationship. You need to work at that intentionally, just like you would with a spouse, with a friend, with a coworker. You intentionally build those relationships with a donor towards a mutual benefit. Above all, abandon random acts of fundraising. Don't do things that don't have an overarching strategy that's aligned with the goals that you have for your donor engagement. So with that, I want to thank you for your time today. And if you have not heard this yet today, or well, it's Monday, so probably not this week, I do want to take a moment to say thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that this can seem overwhelming, and with pandemic and recession and inflation and all the things, it can seem very overwhelming. So I want to say this to you very clearly. Your work is important. You are important. And it makes a difference in our communities each and every day that you are going through this type of professional development to be able to impact your communities in an even better way. I know how hard you work. I know how hard it's been. And I just want you to hear at least me say this today. Thank you, thank you, thank you for continuing to do this work. It is important, it's critical, it's essential, and so are you. So I see that we have a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm going to answer these two, and as you have other questions, feel free to jump in, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ellie real quick to address some other components. But Alex asks about rules and laws about permission required to add someone to your mailing or email list. So there are very specific CAN-SPAM laws around adding someone to an email list. It's really difficult to do this, to take a cold list and use that. So I would highly recommend against it. What I would say is if there's a way to get permission to put them on the email list, that's your first step. So my friend Julia Campbell is doing a presentation kind of right now on transitioning social donors to, or social media followers to donors. And if you can catch that replay, what she says is you have some like low engagement. Will you sign our advocacy campaign? Will you do something simple on social media that gives you their email address and allows them to opt in? So depending on where you get their email address, there may be ways of doing that. There are fewer restrictions around mail, but you obviously don't want to get people pissed around your mail. So be thoughtful of who you're mailing to and be specific about segmentation. And then do we need another organizational vehicle in order to facilitate simple non-cash giving for your nonprofit? No, you simply need a brokerage account for the simplest things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, those types of things, which are the really straightforward. You do need help with trusts. And I would say, unless you're a really big organization, you definitely need help with charitable gift annuities. So that's where you want to reach out to the Community Foundation for assistance with those types of things. Those are things that they're experts in, but also quite literally, no one should, I'm saying this prescriptively, no one should be the no nonprofit should be the trustee of individual, you get what I mean, like community foundations and nonprofit, they can be a trustee, but the regular nonprofit should not be the trustee. But things like just accepting gifts of stock, that's really straightforward for your organization. So depending on the circumstances, that, you know, the Community Foundation can help you with all of that stuff. Ellie, you had some announcements that you wanted to address?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Sharon. This was amazing. And I am a huge fan of alliteration. So I love your, storytelling September and outreach October and needs November. I won't keep going, but I loved it. So thank you. Great information. Yep. Just two quick things here at the end. Don't forget about GiveDSM. This is a great platform. It's a public-facing platform. Donors can visit the website to see what needs nonprofits have in the community. So you are more than welcome to put an ask or two up or more on GiveDSM. And we encourage donors to go here frequently, and it is public-facing. So you could get a lot of traction on needs in your organization through GiveDSM. And then I also just wanted to talk about a couple of additional opportunities coming up. We do have a board basics training on Tuesday, September 27th from 9 to 11. That's in person at the Central Iowa Power Cooperative, which is just up the street here from the Community Foundation. We also have a training on Thursday, September 29th with our friend Abena Amatep Sankofa. And she's going to be talking about getting the full picture, personal and organizational awareness and race. I think that's going to be a really powerful and great session. We're excited to welcome her. And that will be held at the Greater Des Moines Botanical Center, so also in person. So if you're interested in registering or learning more about either of those, they're on our events page on our website, or you can reach out to me and I can help connect you with that. So that's all I had to add, Sharian. I just want to say thank you again. This was super informative. I appreciate your time today and sharing your knowledge with our nonprofit sector. And so thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you all for being here.